Hello, all my pretties, and welcome. Today we're going to be doing an audiobook for the first chapter of The Priory of the Orange Tree. It is written by Samantha Shannon, who is also the author of the Bone series, which some of you may be familiar with. This book is by far an amazing fantasy, mythical, and mystical masterpiece. It is absolutely captivating. The characters are amazing, and it's all just such beautifully written. Overall, I would definitely rate this book like a 10 out of 10. It is absolutely amazing, and I'm so happy to have read this. It has definitely made my world, and I can't wait to read the rest of her novels. Without further ado, let's begin about the book. So the book itself includes a table of contents, of course, the persons of the tale, which is where it describes each of the characters that are kind of mentioned in the book, some dead, some alive. There's a glossary, and there's also a timeline. Directly after the table of contents, you are brought to 2 pages. They are both maps. The maps depict, where all the different little countries or kingdoms are put, and you're able to follow along with the characters as they may travel to place, which is something that I really enjoyed, especially because there would be times in the book where I'd be like, wait, where was that? And I'd be able to track it back down, and it was all very smooth. It's very well developed, so in depth. It is absolutely outstanding. So without further ado, let's begin. On page 1, you are met with a page that says 1, Stories of Old. And beneath it is a little excerpt. And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him to keep him from deceiving the nations any more until the 1,000 years were ended. Revelation 20:1-3. So that's the excerpt that I was just mentioning. While it might seem pretty cryptic as of now, it does become relevant later on in the book, and it all starts to tie together really well. On page 3, you are met with chapter 1, and it's titled East. So without further ado, let's begin. The stranger came out of the sea like a water ghost, barefoot and wearing the scars of his journey. He walked as if drunk through the haze of mist that clung like spider silk to Siki. The stories of old said water ghosts were doomed to live in silence, that their tongues had shriveled along with their skin, and all that dressed their bones was seaweed, that they would lurk in the shadows, waiting to drag the unwary to the heart of the abyss. Tanya had not feared those tales since she was a small child. Now her dagger gleamed before her, its curve like a smile, and she fixed her gaze on the figure in the night. When it called to her, she flinched. The clouds released the moonlight they had hidden, enough for her to see what he was, and for him to see her. This was no ghost. He was an outsider. She had seen him, and he could not be unseen. He was sunburnt, with hair like straw and a dripping beard. The smugglers must have abandoned him to the water and told him to swim the rest of the way. It was clear he knew nothing of her language, but she understood enough of his to know that he was asking for help, that he wanted to see the warlord of Siki. Her heart was a fistful of thunder. She dared not to speak, for to know she knew his language was to forge a link between them, and to betray herself. To betray the fact that she was just now a witness to his crime, and he was a witness to hers. She should be in seclusion, safe behind the walls of the South House, ready to rise, purified, for the most important day of her life. Now she was tainted, soiled beyond redemption. All because she had wanted to immerse herself in the sea once more before choosing day. There were rumors that the great Kiwiki would favor those with the mettle to slip out and seek the waves during seclusion. Instead, he had sent this nightmare. All her life, she had been too fortunate. This was her punishment. She held the outsider at bay with a dagger. Faced with death, he began to shake. Her mind became a whirlpool of possibilities, each more terrible than the last. If she turned this outsider over to the authorities, she would have to reveal that she had broken seclusion. Choosing Day might not proceed. The honorable governor of Cape Hazan, the province of Siki, would never allow the gods into a place that might be fouled with the red sickness. It could be weeks before the city was pronounced safe, and by then it would have been decided that the stranger arriving had been an ill omen, and that the next generation of princes, not hers, must be given the chance to be writers. It would cost her everything. She could not report him, neither could she abandon him. If he did have the red sickness, letting him roam unchecked would endanger the entire island. There was only one choice. She wrapped a strip of cloth around his face to keep him from breathing out the sickness. Her hands quaked. When it was done, she walked him from the black sand of the beach and up to the city, keeping as close as she dared, her blade pressed against his back. Cape Hazan was a sleepless port. She steered the outsider through its night markets, past shrines weighted from driftwood. Under the strings of blue and white lanterns that had been hung up for choosing day, her prisoner stared at it all in silence. The dark obscured his features, but she tapped the flat of her blade on his head, forcing him to lower it. All the while, she kept him as far away from the others as she could. She had an idea on how to isolate him. An artificial island clung to the cape. It was called Arisma, and it was something of a curiosity to the locals. The trading post had been constructed to a house and a handful of merchants and scholars from the free state of Medaton, along with the Lacustrine, who were on the other side of the cape. The Mets alone had been granted permission to continue training in Siki after the island had been closed to the world. Arisma. That was where she would take the outsider. The torch-lit bridge to the trading post was guarded by armed sentries. Few Siganese had permission to enter, and she was not one of them. The only other way past the fence was the landing gate, which opened once a year to receive goods from the Mentis ships. Tanya led the outsider down the canal. She could not sneak him into the Arisma herself, but she knew a woman who could. Someone who would know exactly where in the trading post to hide him. It had been a long time since Nicolas Ruse received a visitor. He was rationing himself a little wine, a trickle of his paltry allowance, when the knock came at his door. Wine was one of his few remaining pleasures in the world, and he had been immersed in breathing in its aroma, savoring that golden moment before the first taste. Now, interruption. Of course. With a sigh, he uprooted himself, grumbling at the sudden throb in his ankle. Gout was back once more to vex him. Another knock. "Oh, do shut up," he muttered. Rain droned on the roof as he groped for his cane. Plum rain, the Sikanese called it at this time of the year, when the air hung thick and damp as a cloud and fruit swelled on the trees. He limped across the mats, cursing under his breath, and opened the door a fraction of an inch. Standing in the darkness outside was a woman, dark hair which fell to her waist, and she wore a robe patterned with salt flowers. Rain alone could not have made her as wet as she was. "Good evening, learned Dr. Ruse," she said. Nicolas raised his eyebrows. "I strongly dislike visitors at this hour, or any hour." He ought to bow, but he had no reason to press a stranger. "How do you know my name?" "I was told it." No further explanation was forthcoming. "I have one of your countrymen with me. He will stay with you tonight, and I will collect him tomorrow at sunset." "One of my countrymen?" His visitor turned her head a little. A silhouette parted ways with a nearby tree. "Smugglers delivered him to Siki," the woman said. "I will take him to the honored governor tomorrow." When the figure came into the light from his house, Nicolas turned cold. A golden-haired man, just as drenched as the woman, was standing on his threshold. A man he had never seen in Arisma. 20 people lived in the trading post. He knew every single one of their faces and names, and no Mentis ships would arrive with newcomers until later in the season. Somehow, these two entered unseen. "No," Niclay stared. Saint, woman, are you trying to involve me in a smuggling operation? He fumbled for the door. I cannot hide a trespasser. If anyone knew, one night, a year, our heads will be sliced from our shoulders regardless. Good evening. As he made to shut the door, the woman jammed her elbow into the gap. If you do this, she said, now so close that Niclay could feel her breath, you will be rewarded with silver, as much of it as you can carry. Niclay's ruse hesitated. Silver was tempting. He had played one too many drunken games of cards with the Sentinels and owed them more than he was likely to make in a lifetime. So far, he had stalled their threats with the promise of jewels from the next minted shipment. But he knew well that, when it came, there wouldn't be a single wretched jewel on the board. Not for the likes of him. His younger self urged him to accept the proposal, if only for the sake of excitement. Before his older, wiser self could intervene, the woman moved away. I will return tomorrow night, she said. Do not let him be seen. Wait, he hissed after her, furious. Who are you? She was already gone. With a glance down the street and a growl of frustration, Niclay dragged the frightened-looking man into his house. This was madness. If his neighbors realized that he was harboring a trespasser, he would be hauled before a very angry warlord who was not known for his mercy. Yet, here Niclay was. He locked the door despite the heat. The newcomer was shivering on the mats. His olive skin was burnt across the cheeks, his blue eyes raw from the salt. If only to calm himself, Niclay found a blanket he had brought from Mettaton and handed it to the man, who took it without speaking. He was right to look afraid. Where did you come from? Niclay asked curtly. I'm sorry, his guest whispered. I don't understand. Are you speaking Thecanese? English. That tongue was one he had not heard in some time. That, Niclay answered in it, was not Thecanese. That was Mentish. I assumed you were too. No, sir. I am from Ascalon, came the meek reply. May I ask your name, since I have to thank you for sheltering me? Typical English. Courtesy first. Ruse, Niclay bit out. Dr. Niclay Roost, master surgeon, the person whose life you are currently endangering with your presence. The young man stared at him. Doctor, he swallowed. Dr. Niclay Roost? Congratulations, boy. The seawater has not impaired your ears. His guest drew a shuddering breath. Dr. Ruse. This is divine providence. The fact of the night of fellowship has brought me to you, of all people. Me? Niclay frowned. Have we met? He strained his memory to the time in Nice, but he was unsure he had ever clapped eyes on this person. Unless he had been drunk at the time, of course. He had often been drunk in Nice. No, sir, but a friend told me your name. The man dabbed his face with his sleeve. I was sure I would perish at sea, but seeing you has brought me back to life. Thank the saint. Your saint has no power here, Niclay muttered. Now what name do you go by? Solyard. Master Trium Solyard, sir, at your service. I was a squire in the household of Her Majesty Sabran Brethrenet, Queen of Ynez. Niclay gritted his jaw. That name stoked a white-hot wrath in his gut. Squire. He sat down. Did Sabran tire of you as she tires of all her subjects? Solyard bristled. If you insult my queen, I will. What will you do? Niclay looked at him over the rims of his glasses. Perhaps I should call you Trium Dolyard. Do you have any notion of what do they do to outsiders out here? Did Sabran send you to die a particularly drawn-out death? Her Majesty does not know I am here. Interesting. Niclay poured him a cup of wine. Here, he said, grudgingly. All of it. Solyard drank it down. Now, Master Solyard. This is important, Niclay continued. Sorry. How many people have seen you? They made me swim to the shore. I came to a cove at first. The sand was black. Solyard was shivering. A woman found me and led me into the city at knife point. She left me alone in a stable. Then a different woman arrived and bid me to follow her. She took me to the sea, and we swam together until we came to a jetty. There was a gate at the end. And it was open? Yes. The woman must know one of the sentinels. Must have asked him to leave the landing gate open. Soolyard rubbed his eyes. His time at sea had weathered him. But Nicholas could see now that he was only young, perhaps not even 20. "Dr. Bruce," he said, "I have come here on a mission of the utmost importance. I must speak to the—" "I will have to stop you there, Master Soolyard," Nicholas cut in. "I have no interest in why you are here. But, whatever your reasons, you came here to do it without permission from any authority, which is folly. If the chief officer finds you, and they drag you away for interrogation, I wish to be able to say in all honesty that I have not the faintest idea why you turned up on my doorstep in the middle of the night, thinking you would be welcome in by Siki." Soolyard blinked. "Chief officer? The Seekanese official in charge of this floating scrapyard, though he seems to think of himself as a minor god. Do you know what this place is, at least?" "Arisma, the last Western trading post in the East. Its existence was what gave me the hope that the warlord might see me." "I assure you," Nicholas said, "that under no circumstances will Pitso Nadama receive a trespasser at his court. What he will do, should he get the wind of you, is execute you." Soolyard said nothing. Nicholas briefly considered telling his guest that his rescuer planned to come back for him, perhaps to alert the authorities of his presence. He decided against it. Soolyard might try to panic and to flee, and there was nowhere for him to run. Tomorrow. He'd be gone tomorrow. Just then, Nicholas heard voices outside. Footsteps clattered on the wooden steps of the other dwellings. He felt a quiver in his body. "Hide," he said, and he grabbed his cane. Soolyard ducked behind a folding screen. Nicholas opened the door with shaking hands. Centuries ago, the first warlord of Siki had signed the Great Edict and closed the island to all but the Luxtrine and the Mentish to protect its people from the draconic plague. Even after the plague abated, the separation had endured. Any outsider who arrived without permission would be put to death, as anyone who would abetted him. In the street, there was no sign of sentinels, but several of his neighbors had gathered. Nicholas joined them. "What in the name of Galleon is happening?" he asked the cook, who was staring at a point above their heads, mouth wide enough to catch butterflies in it. "I recommend not using that particular facial expression in the future, Harold. People might think you a half-wit." "Look, Roos," the cook breathed. "Look! This had better be—" He trailed off when he saw it. An enormous head towered over the face of Arisma. It belonged to a creature born of jewel and sea. Clouds steamed from its scales of moonstone, so bright they seemed to glow from within. A crust of gem-like droplets glistened on each one. Each eye was a burning star, and each horn was quicksilver, agleam under the pallid moon. The creature flowed with the grace of a ribbon past the bridge into the skies. Light and quiet as a paper kite, a dragon. Even as it rose, Cape Hazan, others were ascending from the water, leaving a chill mist in their wake. Nicholas pressed a hand to the drumbeat in his chest. "Now what," he murmured, "are they doing here?" So that is the end of Chapter 1 of The Priory of the Orange Tree, written by Samantha Shannon. This book is a New York Times bestseller, and it is truly a masterpiece. It is a fantastic read. It jumps between different perspectives, all written in third person, and it's just so interesting. The story is so well put together. It is absolutely just outstanding. I highly recommend it to anyone who would like to dwell themselves into a book and just completely immerse themselves in it. It is not a short book. It is over 800 pages long, especially including the glossary and all the end of the book contents, such as the timeline. But overall, it is such a fantastic read. It's probably a book you could get done in a week if you're determined. But as for me, I took my time with it, and I'm so glad that I did. I didn't need to rush it. And it is truly a fascinating book. If you like, I can read the back of the book for you. You know, the little summary. The House of Brethrenett has ruled Aeneas for 1,000 years. Still unwed, Queen Sabran the Ninth must conceive a daughter to protect her realm from destruction. But assassins are getting closer to her door. Eadurian is an outsider at court. Though she has risen to the position of lady-in-waiting, she is loyal to a hidden society of mages. Ead keeps a watchful eye on Sabran, secretly protecting her with forbidden magic. Across the dark sea, Tanya has trained to be a dragon rider since she was a child, but is forced to make a choice that could see her life unravel. Meanwhile, the divided East and West refuse to parley, and voices of chaos are rising from their sleep. Now, while the back of the book isn't very descriptive of what the book is about, it doesn't even mention the surgeon that we met in the beginning of the book. It is still overall very interesting, and there's full of surprises, different twists, all sorts of things. It is also LGBTQII plus community. I said II. My apologies. But it is very friendly towards that community, and I just highly recommend it. There is a bit of foul language within it. There is also some described sexual imagery in a way. I mean, I wouldn't call it in-depth by any means, but there are mentions and hints of it. But this book is recommended for the young adult. It is not for people in middle school or elementary school, given that. But it is overall just an amazing book. The author's note at the beginning of the book states, the fictional lands of the Priory of the Orange Tree are inspired by events and legends from various parts of the world. None is intended as a faithful representation of any one country or culture at any point in history. So in other words, meaning that while this story does have different levels of inspiration from different cultures and such, you know, dragons being one of them from, you know, all kinds of different cultures in history, this book does not represent any one culture or timeline of history. This is its own world, it is its own making, and it is from the beautiful mind of Samantha Shannon. Thank you for bearing with me as I read this first chapter with you, and I hope you enjoyed. And if you stuck this long to the end, I am quite surprised, as this was for a college assignment. But nonetheless, I hope you have a fantastic day, and thank you.